Hello, this is Michael Bartlett, the director of Treehouse. This audio commentary is going to take you through the evolution of this film, how we made it, some of the problems that we encountered along the way. Hopefully, try and be as informative as possible to anyone who's interested about not only the making of a feature film, but also how we shot this film in Missouri as well. Let's give you a little bit of background on this project. When we originally came to shoot this, which was in January 2013, Missouri had a tax credit which then went away. We weren't eligible for it because apparently the tax credit's purpose was to only bring people into the state. We were already here, so apparently we didn't qualify. I've never really been too worried about trying to accept handouts to make films. I do support the big Kickstarter projects that are happening now, and everybody tends to be making use of crowdfunding in one way or another. But I'm kind of more old school. If I can just get the budget from a single investor and get the film made, it makes things a lot less complicated. Obviously, a lot of red tape can come with tax credits. We had a Georgia crew work on this film alongside our Missouri team, and the Georgian tax credit is great. And Chris Campbell, our DP, actually did some interviews while he was up here to people that were lobbying to try and get the tax credit extended. Unfortunately, as I said, it went away, but he was explaining the difference it made in Atlanta and how much business was there and then how much business went away when the tax credit went away and so forth. So we got a single investor, and then I put a little bit of money in, and Hilton Garrett put some money in just to help get this film over the finish line, and we shot it out here in Missouri. I used a local crew mixed with a team from Atlanta that was assembled by Christopher Campbell, our DP. And the background with me and Chris is that when I made Zombie Diaries with Kevin Gates back in 2005, we finally got a release in England, and it premiered at the Fright Fest Film Festival in 2007. And Chris's film, The Signal, which he shot, was also playing there, and I watched it. I didn't actually watch it at the festival, but I saw it later on, and was really impressed by the quality of the filmmaking. Obviously, there's a big success story behind that as well. It sold for a fairly large amount of money. William Morris were involved in the deal. Then I come to find out that the thing was shot in 13 days, and I was like, holy moly, that's crazy. So I was at the Austin Film Festival in 2007, and I met Alex All there, who was the first AD on The Signal, and kind of kept in touch with him loosely, on Facebook and so forth. All the filmmakers are kind of networked on Facebook. And then when this film came to fruition, it looked like we were actually going to go ahead and make Treehouse. I had him reach out to Chris for me, and I didn't even know who Chris was at the time, because I knew obviously there had to have been a DP on The Signal, but there was no credit information about a director of photography on the movie. I looked on IMDb, I looked on the actual film, and then Alex hooked me up with Chris, and Chris explained to me that he mainly lit the shots for the three directors of that film. He didn't actually DP it in the classical sense, so he said he felt bad taking that credit, which was a great sign already, because you can obviously understand what a humble guy Chris is as well. So we started talking, and Chris said, he told me what he's done, his background, and I told him a little bit about me and my background. And Chris says to me, so can I see a script, Mike? And I said, well, I've got a script, but I don't really want to show it to you at the moment. And what happened was, Alex and Miles, who wrote the original script, part of the deal that I did with them to get hold of this movie was to be allowed to rewrite it. The way that it used to work, and still does in many respects, although the film industry is changing so quickly now, but the way that the standard way is that you will pay an option fee to get hold of a script and go ahead and develop it. And that's how I've optioned some of my work that I've written as well. But in the case of Treehouse, when I was developing this, it was developed without, there was no money up front. The idea was that I was going to develop the script, I was going to put the concept art, the package together, assemble a team, and then we would go out and find investors afterwards. So the deal I made with Alex and Miles is, look, I want to rewrite your script for you, but when I'm done, if you guys don't like what I've produced, then you can walk away scot-free. You don't owe me anything, I don't owe you anything. And another motivation behind this is because I've been a writer myself. With the particularly brutal experience I had was with a script I wrote called Timeless. And what happened with that movie was that producers would find out about the film, they get in touch, they'd read the script, and then you'd get an email from them or a phone call telling you, how much they loved your script and wanted to work with you. Let's put a deal together, you name it. And then actually, as time goes by, what you realise is these guys don't like your script at all. They like your idea. And then suddenly you go into a rewrite hell where you're not being paid any money and you're constantly rewriting, and you're thinking, well, when am I ever going to get anything to show for this, And some people can stomach that, and good on those guys that can do that and keep doing rewrite after rewrite with nothing coming in. Unfortunately, I couldn't, and I just got fed up with it, and I shelved Timeless, and then actually I ended up optioning it later on, and that's pretty much owned now by another company who are going to develop it, and I'm going to rewrite it for them once. That's the deal that I've got with them, and then after that I'm out. I find that when you rewrite films too much, you start to lose a connection with the original material anyway, and then all of your rewrites just start to become a bit dry, and it just doesn't work anymore. So I like to develop scripts quickly, iteratively. I have a background in software development, and one of the things that we've used in software development is known as rapid application development or evolutionary prototyping, where client will come to you with a spec for some software and you'll start knocking it out quick, and then you can change it as you go and iterate as you go, and sometimes that tends to make things just a much faster and more fluid process. So Chris waited patiently, and he got the script from me and was very impressed and came on board. And obviously Alex and Miles were happy with the rewrites I did, and there was a little bit of backwards and forwards with those guys as well. And so when Chris came on, he brought his Atlanta team with him. Some of the people that were involved were Daniel Greenspan, who runs a company called Black Box Atlanta, and they do lots of equipment rentals and gear rentals and so forth. And Daniel was fully behind the project as well. Sid came along, who works with Campbell, and he owns a company called Dockhouse that provided the red epics for us. The look of the film is pretty distinctive. I mean, if you see a lot of these movies shot on high definition cameras, they tend to look a bit too video-y sometimes, and you can always kind of tell them apart. With this movie, what we did is we shot on red epics, but we used special Russian lenses called Lomos. And the background behind that was, I have a friend by the name of Drew Cullingham who shot a film called Umbridge in England, and actually stars Doug Bradley, who was Pinhead in Clive Barker's Hellraiser movies. So I went along to the shoot for, I think it was maybe a day or two, because Drew's a good friend, and I just like to support anyone that I know is making a film in some way. I tend to donate cash to a lot of the Kickstarter projects and so forth. I just like to support independent filmmaking as much as I can, and Drew's a great guy. And I was working with, I kind of like worked as a PA just so I could get a feel for who the good crew were without anyone knowing who I was. And pinch, maybe, the idea was to probably pinch a few of them and use them on my projects. There's nothing wrong with that. And his DP by the name of James Friend had this one particular scene where he'd set the shots up, and I was really impressed by the look of it. And I said, like, what are you doing to achieve this look? It doesn't look video-y. It kind of has like this kind of sort of grainy, almost scratchy look to it. And James said, well, these are just old dirty lenses that I'm using. And my knowledge of cameras and lenses is pretty non-existent. I'm an odd director in the fact that I tend to just want to focus on the actors and the story, and if there's other technical things that need to happen, I want to let other people worry about those. So I try not to flood my mind with technical information. Certainly when I worked with Kevin Gates on some of our other projects, there was times where I could have got to know that information, but I stepped back and I don't really want to know about that, and Kevin would handle the technical side. I mean, a large motivation for this is because Clive Barker, who's kind of one of my heroes, he always said that when he got onto set in Hollywood, he found that a lot of people were constrained to think with inside the box, and he felt that if he didn't have a lot of the information, then it wouldn't restrict his creativity, and there'd always be someone there who could say, look, you can't do that, and I'll give you examples in this film of where Campbell said, Mike, what you're asking for is impossible, I can do this or this, but you're going to have to make a compromise. So to go back to the story with Drew, I remembered those lenses, and I told Campbell about it, and I said, look, I want to give it like a 70s, 80s feel. The whole point with this movie is that it wasn't one of these modern day horror films. There's nothing wrong with these modern day kind of movies, but they tend to seem to focus a lot more on blood and jump scares. And there's a lot of comedy in them, which unfortunately I don't do very well. So I said, look, I just want to shoot a straight up old fashioned horror movie, nice and slow paced, very, very character driven. And I want it to have that kind of feel that Stephen King's It had, or Stand By Me had. And so that was kind of a big choice in these lenses. And I told Chris the story about my conversation with James Friend on the set of Umbridge, and Chris went away. He said, I know someone who's got these lenses, and he talked to Sid, and that's kind of how we ended up where we are with this kind of nice look to the film. Colin Geddes, who programs Midnight Madness at TIFF, was talking about the film, and he said that he absolutely adores the look of it, and I haven't really explained it in depth to him, like how we achieved it. But it gets noticed by a lot of people, and I think Campbell did a really good job. So that's kind of like the background on the project. So got it financed. Martin Myers was heavily involved with that, and shot the film over. I think it was precisely a month. And what was crazy about the shoot is that I was diagnosed with sleep apnea afterwards, and I was working my full-time job while I made the film. So what would happen is we'd shoot the film for 5 days. Then I would disappear back to my day job for 2 days, and then I would join the crew, and we'd shoot another 5 days and so forth. And so there was actually one day that just happened to fall on a Sunday that was a day off. So on that particular day, I was looking forward to having some time off, and unfortunately a bug went round the film set, and a few people dropped out. We're only out, a day or two, and unfortunately I was one of the victims as well. So that illness didn't really give me a chance to have a quiet day, because I don't remember much of that day. I was medicated and out of it. So in a sense, I spent literally like 30 days non-stop shooting this film, without being able to even get a proper sleep, because the days were long. We did make the film a Screen Actors Guild movie, which is good in many respects because it restricts your hours. I mean, you really don't want to be going over a certain number of hours because you have to pay extra, and you're kind of limited in what you can do with your time. But even so, I have to drive to set in the mornings and prepare stuff. I drive home in the evenings, and then when the film's officially finished shooting for the day, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's over for you. There's a lot of wrapping up that has to be done, and sometimes people want to chat afterwards. And I found myself maybe getting 4 hours of sleep a night, and then of those 4 hours, God knows how much I actually got to sleep properly for because of my sleep apnea. But I felt probably pretty much like a zombie for the final third of the film. But we got through it, and I'm pretty happy with what we were able to do with the constraints that we had. So let's talk about a little bit about the casting now. We used a lot of local Missouri actors. These two actresses you can see here are both from Missouri. Shannon's from Kansas City, Elaine's from Springfield. I used Heather Laird services. Heather Laird from Right Laird Casting. They cast Winter's Bone, and we basically used them to go out to for the main roles for Crawford, Killian, and Elizabeth, and then they also cast some of the extras in person in Kansas City. So Darren Kennedy, who you can see here, who played the cop, he was awesome, and he only says like 5 lines in the whole film, but I still brought him all the way to do that because he was so significantly better than anybody else we saw for that role. Performances is a real key with these indie films. Once you get someone start to produce a slightly bad performance, it can really ruin a film. And so that was I took my time with the casting and made sure that we got it right. I did a big open day of casting in Springfield, Missouri. I hired out the Springfield Arts Center. Someone mentioned it on television. I think it was on our local channel KY3 and maybe some other places. But we ended up with 300 people showing up. And I kind of learned a lesson from this as well, because we bring them in batches of say 10 to 15 people, and I could look at that 10 to 15 people and I'd know immediately if any of them were even worth reading for some of the parts. I know what Crawford looked like in my head. I mean, I was still auditioning for all roles at this point. I'm not interested in, hey, let's just hire some LA actor because they're the best. I want to hire the best person. And it just so turned out that two out of the three were from LA. But we did get our third locally, which was Daniel Frederick playing Crawford, you can see on the screen now. Um, so if I was to do this open casting again, what I would probably do is say, if you want to be an extra, just submit your information forwards, and then if we think you're right for a speaking role, we'll let you know, and we'll bring you in for a second day, and we'll just have everybody submit a headshot, and then that way we could have told from that. Fortunately, there were a lot of people whose time, unfortunately, was wasted. They had to stand in line for, I mean, in some cases, 4 to 5 hours, because I wanted to give everybody a chance that came into these auditions, but at the same time, I only had from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. and then that was it. And I think we ran a little over on that day. And then the second day was callbacks. So that's something I learned from this, and certainly when I shoot my next film, if we do open casting, that's how we're going to handle it. But all these individuals, with the exception of the main two leads you're seeing here, they all came from that. Chance Nichols, who plays the bully, he came in for the open auditions and was just great, and needed a little bit of work because I think he kind of misread how the part should be. But he's a comedian as well, so he brings a little kind of twinkle to this role as well, which is quite funny. And these guys that you can see next to him are just friends that also turned up in the open audition. One of them actually became one of my best PAs. And that's Josh Lindsay, and he basically came down for most of the shoot, got a lot of experience on the film, and hopefully we'll be able to take that on to future projects. And certainly I'd work with him every opportunity I get if I shoot any more films down in the area. So that's kind of a background on what happened with the casting. What was interesting is when we did our additional day of casting, and we had the TV spot go out on KY3, I then got an email from a young student by the name of Capri Sanders. And Capri said, look, I don't know anything about movies, I've never been a film score or anything like that, but I've always wanted to work in the business. And this was just an email out of the blue to me. So I emailed her and I said, all right, well then if you're interested in getting experience on film, show up to the second day when we do our recalls, and you can be involved. So she turned up and I gave her a job to do, and then she came on as a PA for the whole film, and she got a solid month's worth of experience, and then came back for the reshoots that we did later on that year. And I guess the reason I'm telling you this story is because when I was first starting out in film, or even really before that, technically, and I wasn't starting out, I was just a guy that wanted to make films and didn't know what the hell to do. I remember that I was 2 years into a 3-year computer science degree, and I wanted to drop out. And I didn't have that option because of the funding, and I actually wanted to drop out and go to film school. So what I did is I wrote to all the local directors in the area, and basically just said, and I phoned them as well because it was back in the day before email, and I said, I've got no experience, I'm willing to learn, I'm willing to work for free. If there's any way that I could come along and shadow or anything, I'd love to do it. And I didn't get one single reply. So I figured that if I ever was fortunate enough to be in a position to make feature films, I didn't want to turn anyone away, basically. If someone wants to work on my film, they're more than welcome to. I went to the production assistant training seminar that's run by Kenny Chaplin. He goes around a lot of the main cities in America and does this talk, and I partnered with him, and he came to Missouri and did a talk, and then every single person that attended that seminar I welcomed to come onto the film if they wanted to get experience. And I think we may have ended up with 4 or 5 people from that seminar that came on and worked. And that's basically my philosophy is, I mean, this is such a beautiful industry to work in. It's really tough. And I mean, I can't even do it full time. Like I said, I work a full-time job on the side, but it's just such a privilege to be able to do this for a semi-living, I guess you could say. And if there's people out there that are interested, I want to make sure they have the opportunities, because, you only live once, and I really think it's important to pursue your dreams. So I thought that story might be interesting. So where we are in the film right now is we just obviously had the school confrontation scene, and now the two brothers are sneaking out to go into the woods. The school that you just saw, the history behind that was that we had another school, a state-run school, that were going to allow us to film there. And then suddenly there was all these strange hurdles that kept coming up and problems, and I don't know exactly what was going on, but I know there were rumors going around about this film. I mean, obviously we shot this film in a very religious area, and I think a lot of people were a little unhappy with how Winter's Bone portrayed the area, because we shot this in the same town that Winter's Bone was shot in. Personally, I thought Winter's Bone was an excellent film. I don't really know a lot about meth and all that kind of stuff, but I mean the way it portrayed people and the central theme of the movie was family. I thought it was great. But you know, there are always going to be people out there that like something, people that don't like something, and so we received a little bit of a backlash from that, and we just had so many problems with this school, and we couldn't figure out what was going on. And then the second school that came to us, which was actually a specific Christian private school, were more than happy, very flexible, happy to let us do whatever we needed to do. I had a conversation with the principal and her husband about the content of the movie, and you know, explain that this isn't some sort of Disney film, but at the same time there's a very positive message behind it. Clive Barker always said this as well about horror. He said if you're going to show horror and you want to show the good and the evil, you've got to show the evil properly. You can't just make it some kind of cartoon villain. You have to go really dark and show that stuff to then juxtapose the light against it. So that's kind of what I was trying to do with this film. There's certainly no insidious motivations to to try and brainwash kids into devil worshipping or anything silly like that. Sometimes people maybe read into things a little bit more than what's there. So that's kind of a story I wanted to relay. The locations were all found with the help of Richard Michael. Richard Michael was phenomenal on Winter's Bone. Deborah Granick says she calls Richard her fixer. He kind of is the interface between the New York team that came here and then the locals, and he's able to make things happen, approach people and so forth. So we got all of our locations through Richard, and he's just a brilliant problem solver. To the extent that he puts some of us film people to shame on how good he is at solving practical problems when you're out on a location or a set. So that Richard is the one who got all of our locations for us, and he doubled up in a number of other roles as well. We had him work on the props for us as well. That bear trap that you can see is actually made out of cardboard and plastic. And just sprayed up to look like it's like a real nasty iron trap. I don't even think they make bear traps like that anymore. But that was produced by our special effects guy, Mike Strain. Now this scene is quite important. I want to talk through this. I kind of want to explain like how I direct a scene and kind of the approach to a scene, because obviously this scene, if it wasn't done properly, could be rather disinteresting. It's just two guys standing having a conversation, and you can end up with talking heads if you're not careful. So the way that I ran this, and the way that I normally run scenes, is I bring my two actors in, and then I have my script supervisor read through the scene with them, and I just stand there and I watch and observe. And I look at it as a viewer would look at the scene, and then I think, well, that looks a bit static. One thing I'm very wary of is when you can feel the blocking in a scene. You can feel that an actor's been told, walk forwards 3 places to this point, turn, deliver the line, pick this up. I hate that artificiality. So we run through it a number of times and they get more and more fluid. J-Mac helped me out as well because he picked up this stick, and then that gave us points to cut in and out of the scene with when we just don't want to look at their heads and we don't want to come back to a wide. But that's kind of the process that we went through, and I would enhance it occasionally. I'd say, okay, maybe you kick the tree when you're angry here because you feel a little bit static to Daniel Frederick. And it's just that kind of thing, just trying to warm the scene up and make it more believable. And the more times you do it, the more natural it gets. And so, I can kind of understand why someone like Stanley Kubrick did 20 odd takes in certain scenes, because you just want to just get to the actors to the point where it feels completely natural. So that's kind of like a background on how that all worked. Now here we are at the scene where they first discover the treehouse. This treehouse you're seeing right now is legitimately 50 feet up in the air. It was built by Jeremy Borg, the production designer, and his art team. And it's just a facade. It's just three walls and a floor dressed with old barn wood. And when we were talking about this film, I said to Jeremy, I want to have one outdoor set, which is kind of a miniature that just cheats the perspective. and then I want to have one real set. And we spoke extensively about how this real set was going to be constructed and work. And I guess the idea behind it was that I wanted something that was going to be something where, like with The Exorcist, where when they breathed, the air was cold and you could see the cold air. And I wanted to do something similar with that. I didn't want it to be inside some studio. I wanted it to feel old and rotten and wet and believable. So I talked to Jeremy. I talked to Tony Noble, who's the production designer from England that most famously worked on Moon. I know him through Rob Weston, who produced Zombie Diaries 2. And the idea was that we would build this set with fold-up walls. Tony said in Moon they poked holes through the wall. It's like knock holes out of the set so they could push the camera through, that kind of thing. But because we had a lot of dolly and steadicam shots in this movie, I felt the fold-up walls would work better, and then we could have nice shots that flowed along with the actors as well, rather than being restricted to static shots. So what you're basically seeing on this set now, and they've just arrived at it, is it was built on a very stable platform on a sloping hill. Obviously, all built by professional builders working to proper specs, so it's completely legal and can take the required amount of weight, because obviously you have to factor in not the treehouse and the actors, but all the lights that are going to go on there, as well as the equipment as well. And you'll see that when we're inside the treehouse looking around here, it's a solid structure that's just been dressed to look like it's old. So there's a solid structure there, and then there's all this old barn wood that we managed to just kind of salvage from different farmers in the area, who were quite happy to let us have it. And actually that stuff sells for a lot of money now, so it was very good of them to let us have that stuff for free. But that's kind of how we create this illusion. And the side walls flip up, the back wall opens up completely, and then this front area that you're seeing now, towards the top of them, there's actually a long section cut out, which you probably can see, but no one would normally notice it. And that long section is just there so that when we have shots looking down into the treehouse that glide backwards, that makes all those shots more believable, and that's why we were able to have that little area that we could cut out, and then just dress back up again. And Jeremy added these nice touches of bringing in a tree that's kind of grown, or branch that's grown through the treehouse, which he added in as well. And there's also some branches that him and Richard added at the front as well. So that's kind of like the design and motivation behind making this treehouse believable. We really wanted to sell the audience that they were really high up in this big treehouse. So I hope that kind of gives a little bit of insight into how we did it. I mean, there were some big lights used for this film as well. So bear in mind that we're shooting on these Lomo lenses, so they pick up less light. So we had to use really powerful lights. Campbell originally wanted to have a light on a crane in the distance that was shining through, so it would backlight basically the forest. But because of the sloping, we just weren't, and also the fact that it was dense forest, we weren't able to get anything down there. So what he did is he created an effect which he calls the Ring of Fire, and it's basically a circle going out from the point where the set is, with individual lights there, and then they kind of collectively create that illusion that the big light would have done anyway, with the nice backlighting. And then we had lights sitting up on top of this treehouse as well, and around the periphery as well. So there was a lot of light used, and unfortunately one of the drawbacks when you use a lot of big lights is you get a lot of generator problems as well. So most of the sound was okay and it was salvageable. We used a mixture of lapel microphones and standard shotgun mics. I used the ME66, which I'm recording this commentary with right now. But also that generator sound, you just couldn't always get rid of it, so we had to have a lot of it removed in post. And I have to say, I was actually amazed at how much sound you can remove in post. The sound mixer that came onto this project, his name's JD Evans from England. He also is a friend of Drew's and has worked on a film that Drew made called Black Smoke Rising, and just created some incredible sounds, like tinnitus sounds, where people in the audience actually believed they were experiencing it for real rather than that it was part of the movie. It took them a little while to realise. So he came on, he cleaned a ton of this sound up for me, and then he went ahead and added some really clever sound design. And then the rest of the sound was done by Jeremiah Prescott, who works for Drew Sawyer. He runs Moonshine Pictures down in Atlanta, and they were kind of like the main post house on this film. And Jeremiah came in and did a lot of the preliminary noise reduction and mixing on the film before JD took over and finished it properly. I suppose other aspects that we could talk about regarding sound is the music. The story behind the music is when I was doing Timeless, I wanted David Julian to compose the music. I'm a big fan of David's work. Most notably, he composed The Descent for Neil Marshall, and he composed The Prestige and Memento as well. And his music is very dark, but it has a very strong kind of emotional side running through it. And I met him and his agent in London, and he was totally on board, really enjoyed the script, The Timeless. And then, of course, when that project fell through and Treehouse came up, I contacted him again, and David said to me, well, look, I can't really commit to this because I'm doing too many horror films right now, and I don't want to get typecast as someone that only does horror films. So, but what happened was I'd lost contact with him, and I contacted his agent, who are Airedale Associates, and he'd actually moved and gone to a big agent in LA, but they put me in contact with him, and I was really impressed by the way they did that for me. I mean, most of the times I deal with agents, and I'm sure most filmmakers feel this way, it's always a painful experience, and you always end up wanting to punch someone. And with Airedale, I was just amazed by, obviously I'd met them anyway in person, but just amazed at how they were like, there's nothing in it for us, but we'll help you out, we'll put you in contact with them. I thought that was really kind of them. And Maggie Rodford's the person that I used to deal with there. And so what happened was I started talking to one of their agents, Chantel, and I said, look, I really appreciate what you've done, so maybe you could send me some of your other composers' works and we can talk, and if there's any projects come up in the future, I can, I'd look to obviously give them preference if I like them, because you guys have been great, and I kind of believe in that kind of reciprocal helping one another out in this industry and trying to build relationships with people, because if you just go around screwing people over left, right and centre, then you're not really going to get anywhere. There's a particular group of filmmakers that do this in England, and it kind of came back to haunt them in the end when something happened, and I won't talk too much about that. But with Chantel, she sent me some pieces of music by 3 different composers, one of whom was Richard Wells, and I listened to the music and I was just like, wow, this is incredible. And as I was hearing the music, I was seeing scenes in Treehouse that I thought it would be appropriate in, and I took those pieces of music, dropped them on the timeline, mixed them, they sounded great, rendered them, and sent them straight back to Chantel. And David, as I said, had already passed on the project at this point, and I just said to Chantel, I have to have Richard Wells. And I contacted Alex and Miles. Alex and Miles were kept kind of involved in this project from day one all the way through. So when we did the casting, they were there on Skype saying hello to the actors and watching the performances and making notes. And of course, all the way through editing, they had opinions on this. That was the deal, that that I didn't want to just stamp all over their creative vision. It was a collaboration, and they had to be happy with everything. And so they listened to the music and they were like, Mike, whatever it takes, get Richard Wells. And it's weird because then I look into like who Richard Wells has worked with, and I see he's worked with Jake West, who I used to know in England. I'd actually seen one of the films that he'd made that Richard had composed, and Richard also composed The Mutant Chronicles, which is quite a big budget film. Made most of his money from actually doing the trailers, which was quite impressive as well. That I kind of I had to have the guy work on the film, and to cut a long story short, I was able to work out a deal with his agent, and Richard came on board and produced amazing music. So I was very impressed. We did have a previous score that was done by a Missouri-based composer named Ryan Hamilton Baker, and Ryan did a really good job as well, but just for this level of film it was just a little bit too much, and it was also done at breakneck speed as well, which wasn't fair on Ryan. So because we were trying to hit various different deadlines that we had throughout the making of this film, so that's how we ended up moving on to Richard. And Ryan still has music that he composed that's used in the film as well and credited as so. So I hope that gives a good background on the music side and the sound side as well. With these scenes in the treehouse, it was very cold when we shot them. So there was a lot of kind of people wrapped up and heaters on set and so forth. It was pretty trying on certain occasions, but the crew were amazing, and the way that everybody just kind of like stuck together to get through it, it was pretty amazing. Um, and the actual scenes in this treehouse, I think we shot them over 2 or 3 days. There's the scene with Daniel Fredericks playing Crawford, where he comes in, and with J Mac, who plays Killian, and they discover Elizabeth, and that whole scene was shot on one day. I think that was a good 11 pages actually. And then we came back and then we shot a couple of days with the internal sequences here. And kind of one of the ways that I direct films is I want everything to be as real as possible. So, for example, with Zombie Diaries 2, you've got a guy behind the camera talking most of the time, and Rob Weston, the producer, was like, no, I want that voiced in a studio afterwards. I don't want to pay an actor to come on set every day to talk behind a camera. And I was absolutely against that. I was like, no way, because ADR sounds like ADR. It sounds fake and it doesn't work, and this has to be completely believable. And so likewise in this sequence, Killian and Crawford are supposed to be meeting some girls who later show up in the film, and then the creatures in the woods, or whatever these things are, start attacking them, and all the conversation happens over walkie-talkie. So what I wanted to do was make it as believable and realistic as possible. So I worked with Juliet on the sound, and we set the sound up in such a certain way that we were recording the voice of the actor J Mac who was on the walkie-talkie, and we were recording the output from the walkie-talkie as well. Then we were with the girls, who were standing probably 30 feet away from this set, down in the woods, freezing, and we had a mic station to record the output from the walkie-talkie, so the Killian's voice coming over through it, and then we had a mic on the actual girls as well. And what that meant is it gave us options, so we could either use the real performances, or we could take the performances clean without the walkie-talkie effect and add it in if we had to. And I just feel it gives a much more realistic performance than if you're going to stick someone in a sound booth later on. It sounds more genuine because the girls were cold. You can hear that almost shivering in their voice. So, it's just an artistic thing. I mean, I can't prove whether this method's the best or not, but that's how I like to do things and make them as believable as possible. And Hilton Garrett, who was, he was our line producer / UPM on this film, and really had to take charge of the production one because I can't direct and produce at the same time. I would have continual battles with him over things like this, where I just wanted to do something real and in the moment, and he would be like, do it in post, and so there's good arguments for and against both, but that's just the way that I like to do things. So that's kind of a little bit of background on how this scene was set up, and I'm pretty happy. The scene was actually based on Pontypool, especially the camera movements. In Pontypool, there's a scene where the main character's in a radio station, and he's listening to a reporter who's telling him about all these horrible things that have started happening around the city, and it sounds almost like there's some kind of zombie outbreak going, but you never see any of it. You always stay with the main character, and everything is done purely with the descriptions coming through from the reporter. And I studied this scene very carefully because I just loved how original and different it was, and the way the camera moved. If you're going to keep the camera static all the way through the scene, it's not going to work. I'm not saying you have to have the camera move all the time, but there's just this subtle... you're almost moving around the characters in a very, very slow arc, and you just repeat that process over and over again. And then when you splice the footage together, especially if you watch it on a big screen as well, it gives this wonderful kind of uneasiness with the movement, and it just really helps when you have all that come together with the music and the sound. So that's kind of like one way that you can bring these scenes to life if you feel the camera's a bit static. Like a director I know recently, he sent me a short film he did, and he said, I'm really proud of this. And the scene was a guy who was being very animated in the scene, and the camera was locked, and it felt weird. It felt like the camera was trying to tell one story and the actor was trying to tell another story. And so I said to him, look, my feedback for what it's worth is, if you're going to have a scene like that, keep the camera fluid, have it move around a little bit. It will add to it so much, and it will add to the uneasiness of this character who's a little unhinged. There's a time and a place to use certain types of camera movements and certain types of shots, and a lot of it is just trying to predict those and get those right. Now, actually, that brings me to an interesting point I wanted to raise, which is that there's there's a movement going around now with low budget filmmaking where people are saying don't use Steadicam shots, don't use dolly shots, like minimize those as much as you can. If you're going to use a dolly, just use a slider, because those take so much time to set up, and there's so much hassle involved that it's easier just to shoot everything handheld. And especially if your time is limited, those people are absolutely right. And I kind of like went against the grain when I shot this film, and the film is littered with Steadicam and dolly. And it was a headache to pull it off. It really was. And sometimes I think to myself, well, I wish I'd listened to those guys that do everything handheld. But then you will get a slightly different looking film. It kind of depends on the kind of movie you want to go for. If you want to go for something more edgier, then I think handheld is absolutely fine. I was trying to make something that looked a lot bigger than what it was and punched above its weight, just to prove that I can do this kind of stuff. Because the problem I had with my early career is Zombie Diaries was a big success, and then every man and his dog was trying to get us to make films like Zombie Diaries, and it's almost a little insulting that people think that you can't make real films, quote unquote. You can only make shaky cam films. And so I wanted to show really with this film was to go out and make a statement about what I can do as a director. So that's kind of another motivation for not going handheld. But yes, if you are starting out and you're making your first film or whatever, then I think that handheld is fine, and everybody's doing it now. It just depends on ultimately what your goal is with the film. And ultimately you have to be realistic. There's no point in having a film that looks like Treehouse if you run out of time and you run out of money and you can't finish your film. So you have to weigh all these things up. There's a thunderstorm sequence coming up next. Basically, Elizabeth says, "Pull the thorns and glass out of my feet," and she's going to scream when she does that. So they use the sound of the thunder to mask that, to try and hopefully hide that they're not in the treehouse. They don't know if the creatures know they're in here or not. And we can't. There was no way that we could afford to mimic a thunderstorm, so this was just shot, as is. And then Danny Rogers went in and created a thunderstorm lightning effect on the footage, and then a rain effect on the door as well. And then Jeremiah and JD worked just to create the illusion of the thunderstorm. And I think it works fine for what it is. Just another one of those little tricks that we used. This stuff. The technology that's available now is just incredible, and you can do so much in post-production. I know that there's a movement out there saying, try not to fix everything in post. Try and shoot it if you can, and you should. But sometimes when you go into a scene like this, you already know in advance exactly what you're going to be doing, and you are going to be solving it in post, and that's fine. You just need to make sure that you are, you're aware of how you're going to do those things. So I hope that kind of explains a little bit about how we approach the kind of the shoots in this film, the way we set up the shots, the motivation behind the look and the feel. And this was all, as I said, this was all shot in Missouri in January and February 2013. Then what happened was I wanted a summer flashback, and the only way that I'm going to get a summer flashback is if I shoot it for real in summer. So we waited and we flew down to Atlanta. And we shot this in the middle of August. J-Mac was given a haircut, made to look a little bit younger. And this guy, Clint James, it was a really interesting process how we found him again, Heather Laird cast him. We were trying to get a named actor at first. This is one of the parts I hate about filmmaking, is messing around with named actors and agents. First we were trying to get Norman Reedus, and I don't even know if Norman ever saw the script, despite dialogue going on for 11 months with his agent. Then we tried to get Thomas Jane, and Thomas Jane wanted to do it. He loved the script. He phoned me up, and what was interesting when Thomas phoned me up is that we spent more time talking about my approach to script writing and the techniques I use, which I'll talk about next, rather than the actual film. He was so impressed by the script, and so I kind of spent 30 minutes talking with him about this kind of stuff. And then what we needed for the film is we needed somebody who was prepared to shave their head, because the idea is that we were going to shoot this in Atlanta on a single day, And then the plan was that we would, the person would show up, we'd shoot the first scene of the father with their hair, then we'd shave their head, put them in military outfit, and shoot the second scene, which appear in reverse order in the film, because obviously he's all clean cut when he goes to war, and then when he comes back, he's got post traumatic stress, and he's dishevelled, and his hair's all grown out, his beard's all grown out. So that was why we need to do that way. And Thomas was about to shoot a film in Australia with it was actually his own film, I think, with Nick Nolte, a Western film. So he couldn't do it in the end. And then the third person that we went to was Barry Pepper, very well respected actor who really only does films that he wants to do. He's not really interested in the money. And Barry was all on board until he read the scene, wanted to do it. He was going to be in Atlanta on this weekend, picking up shots, so he was going to be available. Agreed to let us cut his hair as well. And then Barry read the scene with the hanging girls and was like, I can't do it. I have daughters and this is just too much. So at that point, I was just like, I am so fed up with trying to get named actors. Let's just get someone who wants to do this and stop messing around. So I went and had Heather Laird look at a number of different people, and Clint did a pretty good audition. And out of the three actors that were my shortlist, my instincts were that with some direction, I thought Clint could knock it out of the park. Well, here's what's crazy about this whole thing is the character in the film is supposed to be from this backwoods Missouri area. He's supposed to be a ex-special forces soldier with scarring on his face. And I then find out that this actor from LA, Clint James, grew up in Springfield, Missouri, which blew my mind because that's the biggest city near where we were shooting this movie. I mean, and we often get our lunches from Springfield. He grew up in a house that didn't have running water until he was 7 years old. His dad threw his brother through a wall, so he can identify with the kind of characters that were, we were talking about in the film. And then I find out he's ex-special forces, has a scar on his head. I was like, oh my God. And Clint actually told his agent when he got the script through, he said, if I don't get this part, I think I may as well just give up acting. And, lo and behold, Clint was great and did a really good job for us. And so that's kind of a little bit of background about how Clint came onto the film. So look, I talked a little bit about the conversation with Thomas Jane and the scripting. So let's talk a little bit about that. The way that I write scripts completely changed in 2007. I was like every other filmmaker that started out. You always think, screw the rules, screw structure. I don't need any of that nonsense. I'm an auteur. My first draft of my first film is going to be amazing. I'm different. The rules don't apply to me. All that kind of nonsense. And we all go through it. I think it's almost a rite of passage of writers. So Zombie Diaries, Zombie Diaries 1 was written without any kind of structure to it. I'm surprised it kind of turned out as well as it did, although it did drag in places. And I think that was just because we were new to it and it was our first go. But hell, for a film that cost £8,000 and it was shot by two guys predominantly, I think we did a great job. But the film played at Austin in 2007, and I went there, and I didn't know that the Austin Film Festival was just for writers. I just thought it was a regular film festival. So I ended up stuck in Austin for, I think it was a week, or maybe 4 days or something like that. And, all that's going on is classes for writers, a class on how to write good dialogue, a class on script structure. And I was like, oh man, this is boring. So I just started attending the classes because I had nothing better to do. I just want to be sitting around Austin for ages. And I know it's a very negative attitude. I totally, I do not walk around with that mentality anymore, I assure you. But now if there's an opportunity to learn anything, I'm totally there for it, because I think one of the best qualities of a filmmaker is realizing just how little you do know, and with every film you make, realizing how much you've grown and how much better you've got. I'm a big fan of playing chess, and I study chess as well, and chess is exactly the same. It's like an infinite universe, and there's always something new to learn. There's always something new a grandmaster misses, and then people, become familiar with it. It becomes a known strategy or a pattern. And even with filmmaking is always evolving, and there's so much to learn out there and people to learn from. So I was in this one class, and I had my little notebook with me, and someone started talking about all these different methods that exist to write scripts with. And someone said, so and so's 21-point structure. It's all a lot of nonsense. He said they're just people trying to sell books. He said the most important thing is to know the 3-act structure. And then he made an off-the-cuff remark and went, well, with the exception of sequences, though, which is starting to be taught at UCLA, he said they're pretty good. 2 in the first act, 4 in the second act, 2 in the third act. So I scribbled this down, 242 on my notepad, sequences. And I went back and I started to research into it. And I bought a DVD, which is basically a DVD version of the book that exists as well. It was mind-blowing. And the idea behind sequences are that in the old days of cinema, you'd have your individual reels of film, which would run 10 to 15 minutes. And then they would have to change the reel out, and the audience, he'd go home and come back the next week or sit in darkness while they changed the reel out. And so they had to structure these feature films in such a way that at the end of every sequence there was a hook, like, kind of like the same way that TV series work. I always remember when I was a little kid and at school, we were like 8 years old, and there used to be this TV show called Dark Tower, and it was some sort of supernatural thing. All the kids loved it, and the teachers used to assemble us in the assembly hall, and we'd watch the episode of it. They used to wheel this big TV in, and we'd watch the episode, and then it would end right on a cliffhanger. And I remember all the kids in one big group would go, and everyone was so disappointed. And that really is where it all comes from. It comes from the sequences idea, but then got lost through time. And so this guy kind of, and I can't recall his name, it's a bit embarrassing, I really should have prepared this for the commentary, but you can find it easily if you just search on sequences, hidden structure of screenplays. But he kind of rediscovered it, so to speak, and explained how it works. And it revolutionized the way that I write films, because when I produced my Treehouse screenplay, the one comment that I got back in common from everybody was, it's a page turner. My PA said, I planned to read it over 2 days. I started reading it and I just couldn't put it down. And it's really, you don't have to be a genius writer to make these page turners. All you need to do is you start your story off in a certain way. There's a bit of mystery, and the audience wants to some questions answered, and then you get to a certain point 10 or 15 minutes in and you launch a new mystery. And actually, if you're familiar with the TV series TED Talks, J.J. Abrams pretty much explained the same thing in his own way. He explained his mystery boxes technique of writing, and I'm not going to spoil it for you. Just go to TED Talks and watch this talk on mystery boxes. But basically, for me, it's the same approach. You constantly create new mysteries through your 95 minute running time, and you give your audience something new to ask questions about. Will he make it to the top of the tree? Will he find where the smoke's coming from? If they find where the smoke's coming from, how are they going to get out of the treehouse? Will they be caught by these things? What are these things? And you present enough of these questions in a structured way, and this, your scripts write themselves, and it also makes it easier because you're writing in 10 to 15 page chunks. So I wrote 10 to 15 pages of Treehouse, turned it into Alex and Miles, and then Alex and Miles would give me comments. Then I write my next 10 to 15 pages. I mean, it takes the whole process of writing a script from being a really daunting task to making it easy. And the other thing is that because you're reviewing in 10 to 15 pages, people that are reviewing it for you are going to be more inclined to actually read it. There's so many times where someone says, I'll read your script, and I've done this to people as well. People send me their scripts, and I think, oh my God, when am I going to find time to sit down and read 95 friggin' pages? And you just put it to a side, and this keeps happening every day. And I seem to find 90 minutes to get on Facebook a lot, but for some reason not read these scripts. And it's obviously because it's more effort to sit down and read a script. So that's kind of an approach that I've developed with my writers now, that write for me on other projects I'm producing, which is let's write the framework out of the film, how it's going to be structured. Give me the 8 or whatever number of sequences that you think are relevant to the film. And then once we've agreed on a structure, just turn me the first 10 to 15 pages in when you're done. And I'll take a look at it, I'll review it with whoever else is reviewing it. We'll give our comments, you put those comments in, and you move to the next sequence. And boom, it makes the whole process much more collaborative, much faster. That's how I actually write now when I'm hired for writing gigs, because the last thing I want to do is turn in a 95-page script to somebody and have them say we hate it, and be very unhappy with maybe they spent a lot of money on the script, and I'm not a big fan of constantly rewriting for people. So if you use that approach where you say, okay, review the first 10 to 15 pages and then we can deal with any problems there, and then deal with the next 10 to 15 and so forth, it makes life so much easier. So I run a blog called makingthefilm.com, and my blog basically there was two motivations behind it. One was to keep myself motivated because I came into film from an unrelated background. So my blog, which I started in 2001, was all about, I'm just a regular guy. I want to make movies. I don't have a freaking clue where to start. So I'm just going to learn. I'm going to blog everything. And then hopefully it'll be useful to other filmmakers. So the first motivation was to keep myself motivated. I figured that if I was doing this publicly, then failing would look really bad and would be more of a public failure. So I had to keep going even when things went wrong. Films not getting into film festivals, very disappointing. Things going wrong on movies, but you keep blogging it, you keep being honest about where things aren't happening right, and it makes you keep going for that end goal. I'm going to prove to everybody I can do this. I'm going to prove to myself I can do this. So that was goal one of the blog, and then goal number two was to try and motivate other people when they see your blog and they're just some young kid. Some young kid in Africa saw my blog and then he started his own one up, and I don't know what happened to him, but I know that he was pumped up and really excited and trying to inject a bit of that Robert Rodriguez enthusiasm into people. Well, on my blog, when this film's released, on the main page of my blog, I will put a PowerPoint presentation that I've put together on how to use sequences and also how to use them with other techniques as well, because there's other really cool techniques that exist out there. One of the ones a lot of my friends use is called Save the Cat. So I want to put that out there as well, and you guys can look at that and see how they're used together. But obviously mine's only really giving you an overview. I really recommend that you buy the book to sequences, you buy the book to Save the Cat. These things are all very useful tools, they're all good to know, so definitely look through them and decide for yourself what works best for you. And ultimately that's kind of what came out of Austin, was you have to make up your own mind what works best for you. You shouldn't religiously stick to one way of writing if you feel that way is not right. It's just not working for you. Everybody has different things that click for them, and so you just have to find what's right for you and make it work. So again, I hope that gives some insight into the script writing part. Certainly, if you're a producer or a director that likes to write as well, that could be very useful for you too. So now we're in the kind of we've passed the midpoint of the film, where the midpoint I always look at as a number of different things can happen. A ticking clock starts running down, which drives you towards the end of the movie. Also, the main character in a film normally tends to react to stuff that's happening to them, and then they stop being reactive and they start being proactive. A really good example of this is The Wizard of Oz. So you get to your midpoint of the film, which is traditionally where your film's supposed to end. We've got to the wizard, and that's the end of the film. And then there's something just turns on its head. It flips in the midpoint, and you realise that all is not what it seems. And so, in the case of Wizard of Oz, then there's a new mission that she has to go on to, and rather than keep reacting to everything, she has to take control, Dorothy, and take control and make things happen. So that's kind of what I did with Treehouse. The blood sugars are running low on Elizabeth. She doesn't know how long she's going to survive. So it motivates them to get out of the treehouse quicker. They probably last in there a few days without food, but they're going to be in a situation where she's going to possibly go into a diabetic coma, so they need to get moving. So that helps just push the pace of the film along in the second half of the movie. And then, of course, we have the Killian becoming very active rather than reactive when he makes the decision to grow some balls and actually climb up the tree and find out where the smoke's coming from. Of course, finding where the smoke's coming from is like hooking into the end of a sequence. Now they've got a new goal. They need to get to this point where it looks like there's a farmer or someone who lives locally. So again, it drives the story forward. It puts new questions in the audience's mind. So that's already happened. Now we're kind of into the point where they're planning their escape. And there's this nice little light gag. The intention always was that they were going to have these little soldiers that they would put down, and the light would reflect onto the wall and make it look like there were two people in the treehouse, to kind of what's the word I'm looking for? Deflect what the antagonists are thinking. So they're kind of decoyed by what they're seeing in the treehouse, and so the main characters can escape. Now, while I wrote this, someone said to me, "Well, where do these toy soldiers come from? You know, we've got to try and make this believable." And so that's where I came up with the idea of them tying the toy soldiers to the fireworks at the beginning, so that the fireworks, there was a motivation for him actually having these toy soldiers on him. And a little bit more about the nature of writing scripts that are believable, where things happen that make sense. One thing I found is that Hollywood and even the indie scene, we all tend to think a certain way about movies, and there's quite a low standard in terms of like what you think that your audience will accept. So what I did with this movie, in my day job, I met these two guys, Evan Eulis and Stephen Hill, who were just regular guys who love movies, and you know, every week we'd meet up for lunch and I'd hear them bitching about, oh, I saw this film, couldn't believe how bad it was, the main characters just make stupid decisions all the way through. And so I said to these guys, like, you know, look, would you be interested in like reviewing the script as we develop it? They both like horror films, and I tell you, it was the notes I got from these guys was way better than any note I've got from anybody in the film industry. It's strange. It's like we're trained to think within a box, think in a certain way, and then you open it up to just regular Joes, and they see things that you don't. And so much of the script was cleaned up and tightened because of the influence that these two guys had. It was great. And so I recommend, you know, especially if you're a young filmmaker starting out, have your filmmaking team that you work with and develop the story and so forth with, but have someone that's on the outside that that knows nothing about it, and then give them the script and see what they think. Because it's amazing the number of little shortcuts that you tend to make in a script, and well, you know, I really need the main character to end up in a basement, so let's create this silly reason why they do, and it makes no sense whatsoever, and you see it all the bloody time. I mean, look at Prisoners. That film was fantastic. That came out recently. But my God, there was some just ludicrous plot mistakes in that film, and so you know, it's just little things like that that having someone on the outside can help you with. And my gut is that most people listening to this commentary are going to be people that probably have either gone out and made their own films or want to make their own movies, and they're going to just be able to bring people in they know to assist. So that's something I recommend.
I don't think that's such a good idea. No. Come on.
Just quit whining. Sit down.
If you sit down now, you won't be able to get back up.
Okay, so looking at these nice shots here with the mist, this mist was an ongoing thing throughout the movie. We used a hazer for the interior shots, you know, in the houses and in the treehouse, just to give the light a nice creepy look, give the film more texture. These outdoor scenes, though, were created with something called the Tube of Death that Mike Strain uses. And this thing is hilarious. It's this gigantic tube made out of black bin bags that attaches to a fog machine, and then it has holes all the way along the tube. And then the idea is that when you launch the fog machine, the smoke that's disperses evenly over a certain area. And then it will obviously drift nicely, you know, in one direction after it's been created. And sometimes we would have two as well, because when we were shooting the treehouse, the wind would change. So we put one on either side of the treehouse and let them both go, and then you're guaranteed that you're going to have some level of smoke. I mean, obviously, when you use something like this, you know, you are kind of subjected to the weather, and if it's super windy, there's not a whole lot you can do. And if you've got a really tight schedule, that means that you're going to end up with some compromised shots. I'm never ashamed to admit when I'm lucky, because I tend to get lucky a lot with films. It tends to balance out a lot of the bad luck that indie films have, and we got wonderfully lucky with this scene. What was interesting, though, is that this was done on a day where we'd all just worked one day too much. Everybody was exhausted, everybody was ill with this bug that was going around, and a lot of the shots in this scene, and it carries on to the next scene that you're going to see as well, as all shot in one night, were just completely screwed up, so we had to come back and reshoot it. So you'll see the colour balance of this shot, and you'll see the blues are a little lighter, almost, you know, white blue, and then you'll notice the next shots that start after the flashback you're about to see have a little bit more of a bluiness to them, and we tried to grade them the same, but they are basically from two different days. The only thing that's different is that I used ADR from the first day. I just used the voices and laid it on the second one, and you can't tell the difference. The ADR is great, and if you ever do have to do ADR, go out and record it you know, in the place that you actually shot it in, because then at least that way acoustically it's going to match. So this is the day in Atlanta I talked about earlier on, and this is the day where Clint turned up and he had his big beard and his hair. So we shot this first, then we had his hair shaved and his beard cut off, and then we shot the scene of the military. This was the most difficult scene for me to block of the whole movie, and the reason was I didn't see the location in person until the day that we shot this, and it was much narrower and longer than I had envisaged in my head. And sometimes when you have something in your head and you've been walking around with it in your head for a year, and then you see the actual location, the adjustment can be a little tricky. And so I found that with this scene, the movement of the characters and where they were going to be was difficult. Originally, Killian was supposed to be sitting next to his mum. I think the dunking scene didn't have a big divider in between where Clint and Daniel were and where the other two actors were. So that took a little bit of getting used to. And again, if you're struggling with blocking a scene, first of all, it doesn't hurt to have your cinematographer in the room with you, because Chris suggested a lot of good ideas to make that work and make it believable. But also, just run your actors through the scene and watch it. And this isn't quite working. I don't like the way you come in from this side. It doesn't look right, and that kind of thing. You just keep going through that, and eventually, if you've got enough time, which hopefully you should do if you're dedicating a whole day just to getting 2 scenes like that done, then you'll be able to block that stuff out. Okay. Actually, I just thought of a really funny story I want to tell you guys. I remember we referenced the thunderstorm earlier. When we shot this movie, I had everybody in a big... Well, actually, I had them in 2 places. I had most of the crew in a big house that we rented out in Branson, Missouri. And then we had everybody else in a place called the Forsyth Inn. And I remember it was on one of the days off. So I was back on my day job and everybody else was down in Branson. And we had a tornado warning, and I guess there had been some circulation in a supercell coming over the town of Branson, and it was on all the news about watch out Branson, all the weather tweets on Twitter. So I texted everybody, and I kind of amped it up a little bit, and I said, tornado emergency, take shelter now. And everybody barricaded the windows in the house, and I wish I'd been there to see their reactions to it. I whipped it up a little bit, more than I should have, but I thought it was pretty funny. I know a writer called Ari Gill, and he read the script, and he said, my problem with Treehouse is I don't feel anything for little Bob. This little character's been abducted and we're supposed to care about him. I feel nothing for him. I just did why this scene was written in. This flashback was written in purely to give the audience a connection with little Bob, and also understand the connection between him and his sister. So again, a really great idea that came out from one of my writer friends that I showed this to. There's a few people complain that the flashbacks slow it down a little bit. I mean, ultimately, you have to decide what you want to do. When I finished this film, I showed it to a number of different people, and the main negative comment was the film was too slow, and if you want this to be a really great horror film, then you really need to speed it up significantly. And I said, well, if I speed it up significantly, I'm going to lose all my character development. I don't want to do that. And obviously I was given warnings about how that may affect sales and so forth, and I've already made 3 horror films, and I don't even know if you can really call Treehouse a horror. It was intended that way when it was written, but when I look at it now, I mean, it's more of a suspense thriller. One writer I know, a very prominent writer, actually described it as an art house thriller, but definitely a suspense movie. The focus is much more on the characters, and it's almost like a character study of people in this situation than a adrenaline-packed action bloodfest, and that was a conscious decision on my part. When I was growing up, I was heavily influenced by Alfred Hitchcock Presents, that television series, heavily influenced by The Twilight Zone, and heavily influenced by a TV show called Tales of the Unexpected, which was basically like an English version of The Twilight Zone. Oh, I think all that stuff's on YouTube if you're interested in seeing it. But it was basically very mystery-driven, very slow-paced, something's not right, and I can understand why a considerable amount of the younger generation would be frustrated with a film like Treehouse, and maybe they're not my target audience. But I certainly intended this film to be more of the kind of movie that I want to see and people in my generation want to see. And I've shown it to some young kids. I mean, a kid who was 16 watched it and loved it the other day, but I will say he's not your typical 16-year-old. But it's definitely a film that I think people are going to love or hate. And I think it really is all going to come down to the pacing, because I don't think you can fault the performances, the cinematography, the storytelling. I think really it was just a deliberate choice that I made with the pacing. If you've ever seen a film called The Vanishing, the original, that for me is one of the best suspense /suspense thrillers that I've ever seen. That and also a film called George Romero's Martin. Both those films I used to watch a lot when I was a kid. I used to stay up late, watch strange films, not necessarily horror, but just anything unusual that was on late night when I was either staying with my grandparents over the summer or when I was just at my parents' house. I was a typical teenager and I couldn't sleep until about 4 a.m. So I used to watch these movies, and I think that's where a lot of the influence comes with Treehouse. So that kind of little bit of insight into where the pacing comes from. This last third of the film was difficult for me. I was really ill when we shot this. Campbell showed me some of the shots back from this day, and he goes, "Wow, Mike, this is you at half speed. Pretty impressive, eh?" And I said, "Yeah." I wasn't really with it. I was like, I one thing that Alex and Miles told me when we were getting ready to shoot this film, they had a little pep talk with me and the actors, and they said, "Mike, whatever happens, just remember this one thing when you come to shoot the film: tell the story." So when I was really ill, I was just like, okay, let's just make sure the story gets told. Anything fancy that I wanted to do, anything stylistic, let's just throw it out the window. Let's just get the core told. And part of the compromise that can happen as well, especially if you're running low on times, is that sometimes you'll have your shot lists and you'll need to bring them down significantly. You may have 15 shots, you may have to do it in 5. I remember one where I had 3 or 4 shots, I had to do it in 1. That's another part of being a director, is just knowing when and how to compromise. And normally your team will tell you that. Campbell will say, if you want all these setups done in the day, Mike, then there's no way that we're going to do it, and you're going to have to make some compromises. This scene, I don't think I had to compromise too much on it. This was relatively straightforward stuff for me to shoot. I just remember being very subdued while we shot it, and just paying attention, sitting there quietly on the monitor. When I first started making this film, I remember saying I don't need a director's chair, that's a load of nonsense, pretentious nonsense. Why would anyone want to sit on a director's chair? And then by the third act, I was regretting that statement, and one of the crew called me out on it. He said, "I'm pretty sure that you said that people shouldn't be using director's chairs." So I said, "No, I guess I was wrong all along." But when I was ill, I was permanently sitting on that chair by the monitor, and I was very tired, and like I said, the sleep apnea may have been playing into that as well, but I was really beat by this third section of the film. And what's really interesting about this movie is that the three parts of the film, the way that their mood is in the movie, actually kind of reflects how they felt to shoot. Because we didn't shoot this film chronologically by any means, but we did shoot most of the first act in the first part of the shooting schedule, and that's because we only had Daniel Fredericks and J-Mac available for, I think, 6 or 7 days. J-Mac was at a wedding up until the 13th of January, so we had to start when he got back. And then Daniel Fredericks was only available until, whatever the date was, I can't remember off the top of my head, but he was only available for a certain period of time because he was starting a new play. So we had to condense all the stuff with those two guys into the first part of the shooting schedule. Then we shot all the middle stuff in the middle, and then we shot this end stuff at the end. Daniel Fredericks brought a lot of comedy to set, a lot of charisma, kept everybody kind of pumped and energized. And then when he left, there was this significant drop. You could feel it. And also we moved to night times as well. And there was just this kind of like, you could feel a drop in the morale, and things just kind of got a little sinister, let's say, for that second part of the film. By the time we hit the third part of the movie, things got really dark, because then people were getting ill and people were getting frustrated, and it's weird because it kind of translated into the storytelling, and you almost feel this levity with the first act. Then you feel the suspense start and the darkness start, and then when you get to this part of the film, you can really feel it in the movie that all is not right. And there's almost this little part of lethargy to this part of the film as well, which kind of works great with the storytelling because there's this kind of uneasiness as they're creeping around this house. Now, like I said, all this happened by accident. It just happened to be the way that it played out, but you know, it benefited the film in the long run because you can really feel it on screen. So where we are, this actually is my favourite shot of the entire movie that you're seeing now. The reason I love it so much is because, I mean, we obviously cut away here, but the shot in itself is as a single one shot that moves from a very dark area right up to a bright window, and no lighting was adjusted or anything. The weather was really gloomy outside, and it just worked so well. This singular shot where she comes out of the darkness and then walks up to the door, and I thought the gaffer did a great job on this one. This part of the film I prefer the most, just because of the uneasiness that's present on screen that we achieve with everything. You know, the performances, the lighting, the sound effect. These apples that you can see were just baked to achieve that effect that they're rotten. Richard Michael created those nicely and did a lot of kind of innovative things with his props. You'll see that Killian, when he's walking down here, he gets to where the smoke's coming from, and the effect that you're going to see when he gets around the side of where the smoke's coming from was a brilliant special effect that Mike Strain created, which was this burnt body, and actually had him cast Daniel Frederick's head to make it more believable. And then this location was two separate locations that we kind of tried to mirror up into the same one. There was just so much interesting architecture in this part of Missouri, all these old creepy looking barns, which was always the intention when we started shooting the film anyway. So that's how we were able to get these really interesting looking locations. When Elizabeth creeps down the hall and you see this kind of unsettling religious iconography, we then cut back to what was the second location used that's doubling up as the one that Killian walks into. And it turned out really neat. It's almost like he goes into this old barn, and then when he carries on, he then gets into this second section of the barn that's got all these like dead skinned animals hanging up, which Mike Strain also created. And this stuff actually looked like this. So I mean, it made the production designer's job so much easier because, you know, sometimes a good part of production design is just finding the right locations. If they've got their own character and they're lived in and look realistic, then it does a lot of the work for you. So that paid off really nicely. The stuff inside the house was shot in a completely separate location. It was just someone who was selling their house, and they were happy for us because it was completely empty to go in and use it for a day. And the special effects turned out really nice here. A good friend of mine, Deb Forrester, played the dead grandma. I didn't want to do this with a special effect. I wanted a real person made up to look like a really good special effect. Now, what was interesting about this scene is I didn't know that Deb had some kind of like breathing problem, and she couldn't hold her breath very long. So her body was going up and down all the time, breathing. So obviously I can't have a character that breathes, is supposed to be dead. So we brought in some special effects guys. And I don't know how they did it, but they Andrew Donahoe was the lead effects guy down in Atlanta. Also works for Moonshine, and they just created this wonderful effect where I guess they took a still of her and then somehow tracked it, but they took the breathing out completely. And what you were seeing on all those shots is just a still image that's somehow been modified and tracked in a three-dimensionally, and that's how we managed to get rid of her breathing. So here's the effect that Mike Strain, but we're going to see that in more detail shortly, of the burned corpse. This day was great when we shot it. It was just such a gloomy day. The three guys playing the three antagonists of the film were great to work with, all local actors. I tried auditioning everywhere to try and find like the three juveniles in this film, and no one could do it. It was almost like all the actors that are trained actors are just too, I don't know, they were kind of wimpish and theatrical, and they didn't have that kind of rawness about them. I mean, I was almost wanting to be intimidated when I met these three guys. And actually, when I met these three in real life, they all went into character, and they were very intimidating in real life. They were slightly older than I would have liked. They're supposed to be playing three kids that live with their grandma, and their grandma's passed away, and she was their only good influence, and kind of they've been left to their own devices, and idle hands do the devil's work. But these guys, I mean, one of them was in his early 20s, one was in his mid 20s, one was in his early 30s. Two of them are actually brothers, but I'd loved them to have just been a little bit younger, because when I got the original script, the antagonists in the film were three hillbillies, and I said, I'm not going to make a film where the antagonists are just three hillbillies. I've seen that movie a million times. I said, we need to find a way to make this unique. And that's where I came up with the idea of making it kind of like Lord of the Flies, where there are actually three juveniles that are doing this. So that was probably one of my only regrets with this film, is I just wish these guys looked a bit younger, but I couldn't find anybody. I tried, and I mean, like I said, I saw 300 people in Springfield. The people that I did see that could have been right, but still think these three guys were a lot better. The people that were of the right age group, their kind of mentality was, well, we're really only interested in being the lead, and you kind of got this sense from them that if you cast them as the antagonist, that they probably wouldn't show up because they had delusions of grandeur about their acting careers, even though they were unknowns. So I just had to play it safe. And I mean, I see a lot of Hollywood movies where you have people in their late 20s playing kids, so I hope it sells on screen that that's what they're supposed to be. I hope people don't think that I just copped out and made the antagonist three hicks, because that's definitely not what the intention was. And here, there's a scene in this treehouse where she talks about a spook light in the trees, kind of based on the fact we have these weird spook light down in the corner of our state near Joplin, and that's kind of what she thought that was. But then you realise actually that what she was looking at all along was someone taking photographs of her, which is this little guy, and we hear his breathing, and we realise it's the same bald-headed creature that was breathing on the treehouse porch. So that's kind of like where that all ties up, although it should be obvious at this point that these are the same people that were hunting them in the woods. And this stuff actually was shot on the Red 1. Most of the film was shot on a Red Epic. This shot was shot on a Red 1. This day that we were doing this, the Red Epic was out in the helicopter, and they were getting the helicopter shots all over the county, which just looked great. I was so pleased with them. They shot them in full 5K, and I have to say, Adobe Premiere's warp stabilizer just blows my mind how good it is. The shots, because you have to bear in mind that Campbell was hanging out of a copter trying to shoot those things, and the footage was a little jittery, and I mean, just the end result was smooth and really nice. Okay, so with this scene now, we have where Killian finds the burnt body of his brother, and you can see the effect that Mike made in its full glory. And there was people out of frame just pumping up little bits of haze to give you the idea that it's still burning. And there actually was a little fire on the ground as well when he picks the necklace up. Campbell, I told him the shot that I wanted, so he just had his guys on the spot build a ramp so that we could get that shot where it kind of goes up in the air underneath the body and then comes around him. And his team were amazing. There was a shot where there was a scene where there's supposed to be an injured deer that the boys bring back with them that Dana finds. We cut that scene in the end. And the shot couldn't get low enough. I wasn't happy with the shot. So Campbell dug a foot-deep hole in the ground to put the camera in so that I could get the shot I wanted. And that's what I loved about working with him as a cinematographer, is he was very open to let me pick my own shots, and occasionally he would say, I'd like to add this in or do this to make things easier on you and help the storytelling. But he pretty much let me have free reign with the shots, and he would do everything in his power to make it happen. And it was just great working with him because he would deal with his camera team. My ADs would pretty much deal with everybody else. So I really only had to deal with Jason Wilkins, who was my first AD, and Chris Campbell. And then occasionally I would have conversations with the actors when I needed to, explain how to do things. But really, I mean, by my side it was Chris, it was Jason, and then my script supervisor. I worked with Evan Eulis and Stephen Hill. I brought those guys on to do that. And, it was always one or the other of them. They would take different days off from work to help me. So here's one of the classic shots I was talking about where I had to compromise. Originally, when these guys leave the room, Dana is hiding behind a curtain. And the idea is that the shot gently pushes in on that curtain, and then you start to see the curtain move, and you realise that she's been behind it all along. And Campbell said, nope, based on how close we are to the wall and the rig, he said, you're either going to have to pick. We push in or we boom down. Those were the two that I wanted, and I can only choose one or the other. So I said, well, that's fine. We'll boom down. We can always digitally push in if we need to, because we're shooting on 4K. It gives you so much flexibility, and I didn't need to do that. I thought the shot worked great as it was, just booming down. But those are examples of kind of where you may have to compromise as a filmmaker. So then we come from this point of the film onwards, it really is just kind of like non-stop action all the way to the end. And I really like the gag that Mike Strain pulled off of here, where they shoot this gun off and Killian gets shot just near his ear, and Mike was standing right next to him, just underneath him, and he popped this thing and then just darted out of frame as Killian falls down, and it just worked great. I mean, you can't see him. We did it first take, looked wonderful, and just moved straight on to the next one. These shots here were pretty interesting. I wasn't happy with the effects on Nick's chest the first time we did it. So this shot's the original here, and then this is the reshoot that we did a year later here, where he beats up Dana. And I think you can tell if you look closely. I think maybe the light's coming from one side and then maybe it changes. So I can't remember, but there's definitely a little giveaway in here if you pay close attention that they were shot on different days, months and months apart. But we managed to tie it all up in the edit, and it looked pretty good. So then what we did is, when Chris Campbell was location scouting with me, we found these really nice old looking power lines which we really wanted to incorporate into the film. You can see them here in this shot. Campbell made a point of flying over them in the helicopter scenes at the beginning of the film, so we made sure we incorporated those in, and then that's kind of a sign that he's running away and he's getting closer to civilization. The location that we shot this at, I mean, in real life, the neighbour died and no one knew for 2 weeks. That's how remote it is. But the idea is he's slowly getting more and more closer to civilization. This is all the reshoots. This was all done in November and December 2013. And so he brought everybody back, flew J-Mac back, and the reason we reshot all of this is that I was so ill, I just wasn't there for one day when we shot the original fight scene, and I wasn't happy with the way it was done, and just also there was issues about originally it was supposed to be in the water together, and then we weren't able to get J-Mac in the water because he was really ill, so we had to change the way that was all done and reblock everything. So that's kind of why I just chose to do this as a reshoot and do it properly, do it my way, get much more time with the tension between him and Nick Hera, who plays the tall one here. And this was all shot on Red 1. We didn't actually use the Lomo lenses. Campbell said, 99% of America probably won't be able to tell, but I can, and I'm sure most trained eyes will be able to tell, but it doesn't bother me. He thought Danny did a really good job of replicating the look as close as he could with the lenses he had available. But I'm glad we did these. A little trick I used here is trying to make them curl around one another. It was awkward for Nick to walk down there without causing a ton of sound, so Nick was already stationed on the ground, and I just had J-Mac use his eyeline to tell the audience where Nick was, which is a nice little trick you can use in situations like that where you maybe can't physically move somebody. The night gag was nicely done, and then Danny added in the blood when it falls down, trickles out of him. So I thought that worked a nice little treat as well. Danny did a lot of the CG on the film too at the end when we ran out of time with the post house in Atlanta. So we're coming up towards the end of the film now. This was just some of the reshoots that we did at the very end of the film. We shot the film and then we just tacked on 3 days to get some additional stuff in. We brought Daniel Fredericks back to do the school scene where he punches Jaminski, and then we did a lot of the tie-up stuff at the end here. This is where he finds Dana. Now, originally, you see, before this shot, you're supposed to have Dana finding the deer and then stumbling into the forest. Now she just shows up in the forest, but the deer scene just wasn't working. I mean, we shot that 3 different times with a real deer, with a fake deer, and different conditions, and it just wasn't working. You know the old saying, never work with children and animals. Well, you know, the kid worked out, but unfortunately the animal didn't, and we did everything we could to make it work, but unless something is 100% believable on screen, I don't want it in my film because it's just not going to look right. It's going to reflect badly on everybody. So that's why we chose to cut that scene. So now we're into kind of like the climax of the movie, where we've had one of the brothers has been killed. That Killian stabbed. The big one is in there somewhere. We don't know where. And then we have the small one leaping after them. So we did this car crash scene, and I was really happy with what we got here. Look at these icicles on the wall. It just turned out great. All that smoke is CG. It was put in by the team in Atlanta. They did a great job adding that in. It looks completely believable. We had 4 bullets to use, 4 squibs, and we got it first time with these 2 here. Then we used another one in the wide. But look at those icicles on the side. I mean, that's completely natural. Just we got lucky there. It looks so good. And I think there's just a little bit of a breeze, so occasionally the leaves blow eerily along as well. So we used 2 bullets for the 2 squibs for the shot on the bad guy, and then another one here on the ground. I mean, this is another one of those situations where I had to make a call as a director, and I made the right call. We ran out of time to shoot this entire scene on this day, so we got our wides in. And then what I did is I shot everything in one direction, so shooting towards the icicles. And the reason I did that is I said to Campbell, look, if we come back on a different day, those icicles might not be there. And then if we're getting other shots in that direction, people are going to notice the continuity error. So let's get everything facing in that direction on one day, and then we'll try and shoot the other stuff. And then if we run out of time, we can shoot the other. And there's a little bit of a disagreement on set about that, but I mean, I think I was completely correct to do that, and that's what I would recommend if you find yourselves in a similar situation where there is something about the environment that could change for continuity. So all of this all on the same day. This scene's hilarious because I told them, normally when I direct, I'm not really an arty-farty director. I just explain, this is exactly what I want. This is, this. I sometimes I'm as specific as turn your head and say this line, which I did at the very end of the film when they're talking about going back into the woods. But this occasion, I did give them some fluffy direction. I said, remember the scene at the end of Titanic and the way the 2 of them are talking to each other, the pace they're talking with one another, the shivering. I said, just give me exactly what's in that scene. And this was the coldest day of the shoot, and it was brutal. It was really brutal outside, and these 2 actors were genuinely shivering. Whenever a take was finished, they would be rushed back inside my car, which was always left running, but far back enough that they wouldn't affect the sound with the heater running, and it was bad. I mean, I was very concerned, like just how cold we were going to let things get. But we had safety people on set that were checking everything and made sure that the actors weren't exposed out for too long. This I'm really pleased with. Campbell was like, well, how are you going to shoot all of this stuff? And I said, we're going to do it all in one Steadicam shot. And he was really unsure what the hell I was talking about. So I kind of used my hands to portray the edges of the screen. And I kind of walked the Steadicam operator through what I wanted. And all of this section that you're seeing now was all done in one Steadicam shot. And I'm really pleased with it. I think it serves the story beautifully. I mean, maybe if there'd been more time, maybe I would have cut it up into more shots. I don't know. I mean, seeing it now, I'm so happy with it. Sometimes having these steadies lends so much to the storytelling of a film as well. Just those elegant, subtle moves, in tune with the characters' emotions of how they're feeling uneasy about the fact that one could still come out. And it's that slow build up to the mystery of what's in the trunk as well. And then we have him pull out the bullet here again, and this is kind of like the completion of the character's arc. People often say, why did you end the film when you did? Even Colin Getty said, a midnight audience isn't going to want the implied violence at the end of your film. They're going to want to see the violence. And for me, from a storytelling point of view, this story is about a boy that becomes a man. That's what this story is about. And this moment here is the completion of his arc. He puts the necklace on, and he's basically going to do what his father did. His father ran into towards an enemy blind, not being able to see them. You know, these cowardly snipers were behind things, but he ran blind to save his fellow troops, you know. And Killian doesn't know where that big one is. He knows he's in the woods somewhere. He doesn't know if he's picked that shotgun up or not, but he knows he's got to go in there and he's got to finish him off. Yeah, a few people made remarks to me about the dialogue here when they say, well, you know, these two could end up possibly convicted for brutally murdering this guy after what he's done, and would that really happen? And you know, surely the guy would go to jail for longer. He wouldn't just go to juvie. And I'm like, well, look, you know, I've seen some weird things since I've moved to America, and there's some strange decisions that go on in the courts, you know, and it's not out of the realms of believability. There's some subtle commentary in this movie that I've been making. I like to do things subtly because I hate films that are like, you know, hey, we're a Christian movie and it's in your face and it turns a lot of people off. So, you know, there's some kind of religious commentary here. You know, the line that you heard earlier on where she says, I believe what I want, that's how it works. I'm not religious, but I've moved to America and I see that Christian people seem to be kind of made fun of a lot and under attack, and it seems to be rather mean-spirited, really. So there's a little bit of commentary in there about the South, and I love the people here. People are really good. There's no religious nut jobs. Everybody's really kind, and there's a lot of wonderful goodwill. I mean, Danny pretty much helped me finish this film. He did the remainder of the CG on it and the remainder of the grading. Spent countless hours on it, and he did it out of the goodwill of his own heart. He didn't have to do that, and a lot of the people that I've worked with, you know, the similar mentality in this area. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying all people in cities are bad or anything like that. I'm from London. I had a great time when I lived in London and had some great friends there, but there is a certain different kind of mentality that comes in these religious areas, and I really like it. And so there's a little bit of commentary about that, about the American judiciary system, little things here and there. But, you know, all in all, I just wanted to make a character piece and not preach to people, just make an interesting film and a story about a boy that becomes a man. And so I think that I achieved that, and I'm really happy with it. And, you know, I hope that you enjoyed the movie and that you enjoyed this commentary. I hope it was useful in some way. I'm going to try and do a second commentary that just talks about the filmmaking process and, you know, distribution and all that kind of stuff. So if I get around to doing that, hopefully that will be on this disc as well and be useful. But you know, I always really wanted this to focus on the story of Treehouse. So to sum up, you know, the film took 2 years to do. We started shooting it in January 2013. I'd already started the script back in the middle of 2012, and then we're delivering it right now as I'm doing this commentary in August in 2014. And the main reason is the reshoots. I had to wait for the season to change back, and then just trying to get the film made and make it perfect. You know, having actors in LA, you know, it means you've got to fly them back. You've got to work to their schedules. So, you know, it's not like you can just get all your mates together like we did in London, where we had everything at our disposal, and shoot the movie and shoot the reshoots. You know, it takes a little bit more time, a little bit more money, because you've got to fly people in, and you're working with Screen Actors Guild, so you have to make sure that you are, you know, paying certain rates and all the extra paperwork that goes with that. I will say that my experience with the Screen Actors Guild was great. A lot of people, indie producers, told me to, you know, if you can avoid making it a SAG film, don't do it because of all the hassle. But I mean, I thought it was great. The people that I worked with were wonderful. My rep's name was Kathy Byrne out of the Chicago office, and we had problems trying to find a company that would do the payroll, and she put us directly in contact with Falcon Paymasters, and they were amazing to work with as well. So if you're a producer and you're concerned, I would say don't worry about it. I don't know whether the reps are different in LA or not, but certainly shooting out here in Missouri, I thought they were amazing. And I've met other filmmakers from the area that have also worked with SAG in Chicago, and all of those people were really happy as well with the end results as well. Really walked us through it. You know, there was one serious incident on set where an actor was injured, and we had to fill out the injury report, and I had to get the agents involved and everything. And you know, everybody was great, very professional. You know, filmmakers always worry, oh, if something like that happens, what, are they going to close us down? Nothing like that happened at all. You know, there's obviously proper procedures in place to handle things like this, and all in all, it was a really positive experience. The other good thing about shooting in Missouri is obviously cheaper standard of living. Obviously you have to pay minimum wage, but generally you can knock out pretty good quality low budget films here than if you were shooting in some of the more expensive areas in the city. So we had a great time, and we also just had really good experiences working with a lot of the local people. A lot of the locals very happy to help out, loan their properties for use in the movie as well. Some of the people that worked with us had worked with the Winter's Bone crew, so they already knew what to expect. Some of the other people hadn't, but having someone like Richard Michael to kind of be a liaison with the local people was just a real big help as well. The insurance company you can see coming up here on the screen now, PJ Insurance, got us such a great deal. I think it was like 4 times cheaper than the nearest quote that we got, so I recommend those guys if you're going to be shooting in the Missouri area. The music was a little bit of a process to go through. I'll talk more about that in the other commentary. Just trying to get licensing issues worked out, all that kind of thing. But everybody was great to work with. It was a good experience for me working with Sony to get the clearance rights on the dance track. Had some local bands contribute, local Missouri bands contribute to the soundtrack as well. So yeah, I mean, I think really that summarises everything I wanted to tell you about this film. I probably annoyed a lot of people because I took so much time on it, but my moral of this story is, if you're going to make a film and you're going to put 2.5 years of your life into it, spend the time and get it right, because it's not always about the money. Why ruin your career and rush a product out? Thank you.